Welcome to segment number 2 of the V-2 build series. In this segment, we'll be preparing the airframe for the V-2 model. You'll notice that this is significantly different than most large airframe components found on injection molded aircraft kits. That's because this is not injection molded. It is created using a process called blow molding. Blow molding is the process used to manufacture many of the consumer packaging items that you have around your home. The most classic example is probably a water bottle. In the process, hot air is injected inside a tube of molten plastic, and that tube expands to fill the void of a mold tool. And it creates all the detail that we can see on the outside here. Now we've got 2 dome structures at each end of this. These domes are here to help the molten plastic flow over the ends of the mold and produce a sharper point at each end. What we'll need to do is slice these off using a razor saw. Before we do that though, we're going to highlight the crevice at each end using a standard pencil. I'm using a mechanical pencil here because I'm too lazy to sharpen pencils. I'm going to mark each end. With that, we've got a good defined line that we can use as a target for our razor saw. Now I'm using a Tamiya razor saw here, but you can just as well use a, say this X-Acto razor saw or this Zona razor saw if you prefer. Let's go ahead and get started. Work slowly and keep the saw on the mark. Notice that I'm just pulling the saw towards me. I'm not doing a forward cut. That's because I want to keep more control over the cut. There, the saw has finally breached the plastic. We're going to move really slowly at this point. And the first dome is off. We'll start on the other end now. And the second dome is off. The next thing we need to do is smooth the interior surface here. Now, the simplest way to do that is with some sandpaper wrapped around a wine cork, just like this here. Works great. A little time consuming, but it'll work just fine. But I want to make you aware of a tool that's out there. This is made by a company called Shaviv, and it is a purpose-built tool for scraping an interior round surface like this. I found out about this from the guys at the molding shop that helped produce the kits. It has a rotary head on it. It's kind of interesting. This tool spins freely in the handle, and it works by just setting it inside and going in a circular motion. And it pulls off these nice long threads of plastic. But it's completely unnecessary. It's just nice to have. We need to smooth both ends to remove that burr. We'll go back to the sandpaper here. I'm also going to take a sanding stick and polish the end to square it up. We'll do that on both ends of the part. The next thing we need to do is make sure that the nozzle and warhead components fit cleanly into the ends of the airframe tube. First thing we'll do there is remove these parts from their sprue. This may need a little help. I'm going to get this started with an X-Acto blade and finish it off with the sprue nipper. I'll use a sanding stick real quickly to get rid of any residual marks. The next thing we'll do is see how these parts fit into the airframe tube. If you'll notice here, there's a joint line at the aft end of the airframe tube. The nozzle will fit into the aft end here. At this point, it's a little snug. We might polish that with the sandpaper just a bit more. Let's see how the warhead fits at this point. And it's pretty much a perfect fit already. So I'm going to remove the nozzle. I'm going to take my sandpaper wrapped around a wine cork, and I'm going to polish that interior surface just a bit. We'll work slowly, check it periodically. That's a pretty good fit at this point. We're going to leave it right there. We'll dry fit this in place. We're not going to use any glue or adhesives at this point. I'm going to pop the warhead off and save that for later. The next thing we're going to do is notice these seam lines along the sides of the airframe tube. Now, for much of the airframe tube, we've managed to hide that joint line along this raised airframe join panel. On the real V-2, the upper airframe was constructed in two halves, and that seam line was then covered by a screwed-on panel, aluminum panel. What we're going to do is take an X-Acto knife, preferably an older X-Acto knife, and I'm going to drag that gently across that seam line. It's going to make a terrible sound, but these threads of plastic are going to come off along that join line. Starting to look good. Now I'm going to take a medium sanding stick and I'm going to polish the seam a little bit. Okay, that's starting to look pretty good. Now it gets a little trickier up here at the front because the seam line goes through a clear panel. So we're very carefully going to scrape it away. You're going to want to work very slowly here. And using a combination of this dragged knife technique and sanding sticks, starting with coarse sanding sticks, we're going to get rid of this seam line over time. Okay, we have one final step in this segment, and then we're going to move on to the next. We need to remove the seam lines from the lower aft end of the airframe tube. For reference, here is the join line between the front and aft airframe sections. And that line goes right along here. We're going to use the same technique we used earlier. We're going to draw our blade along that seam line until most of it's gone. Then we're going to use our sanding sticks along that line. Complete that for both sides, and we're ready to move on.